Okay. Good morning, everybody. Ooh, we've got a lot of keeners today. There's a lot of people uh, attending already. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session, which is called Extreme Makeover Internal Comms Edition. Now, a few of you, I'm sure, are wondering why it was called the Internal Comms Edition. That's because we had an intranet specific edition last year, which Will also helped us present. That is on our YouTube channel, the recording of it. So feel free to jump over there and check it out. It's definitely worth a watch. And yeah, we'll include a link to it in the recap email for today. So yeah, my name is Ian. I'm part of the marketing team at Thought Farmer, and I am super excited to have all of you here with us today because I have seen what Will is about to present, and it is going to be a great session, actually. Just a ton of actionable insights, and of course, having Will as the presenter is the proverbial cherry on top. Okay, so I can see we have a lot of attendees. There's still a lot of people joining. So while we're waiting for everybody to log in, let's kick things off with a little icebreaker that's inspired by today's topic. And also Bill Lumberg, for those of you who are old enough to remember who he is. What piece of corporate jargon should be banned forever? You can use the chat function in your Zoom toolbar to add in your 2 cents. What I will say, I certainly have a few pet peeves. Taking helicopter views of situations, getting ducks in a row, moving needles, growth hacking, all really very irritating. Will, do you have
Oh, we have
anything?
we already have a synergy in here,
Oh,
which
a synergy, great one. Yes, that is a great one.
I think one of mine is thinking outside the box has just become very jargony for me.
Yeah, there's more than a few in there. Uh, okay,
Hustle
where are we?
mentality.
I don't think I've heard that one before. That's
Oh, I've heard it.
oh,
It's
circle back. Oh, we're all a big family. Oh, these are all grating on my soul.
I'm getting
Herding
PTSD
cats or
just
herding
looking.
kittens. Hilda, I think you're going to enjoy today's session because there may or may not be cats and kittens in the session. Okay, so I think we have most everybody
Oh,
here, and
sorry, Ian.
oh,
Someone's saying chat is disabled for them. Not sure if maybe we can check on that to
okay. I am
see.
sorry about that. Do.
Q&A works. We have a lot of Q&A already. It's been a
We have a
very
lot of
popular.
Q&A already. Um, okay, I will. I'm not sure why the chat is not working for you. I will jump on the back end just in just a couple of minutes and fix that issue. But I don't want to kick things off because we have most folks on here, and it's quite the global assembly that we have here. So, yeah, let's kick things off with just a few quick housekeeping items first. First off, pretty standard. This session will be recorded. So there's no need to grab screenshots or try and capture one of Will's many quotes. We will be sending out the recording along with other resources as soon as we're done today. Next up, your mics and your cameras have been disabled, so feel free to keep on your breakfast or sipping your coffee, depending on where you are in the world. You can just relax and focus on the presentation. Speaking of chat, you can chat with us, of course. Just use the chat function in your Zoom toolbar. I'm going to check on that chat glitch as soon as we're done, just to make sure it's working for everybody. And last but not least, we have set aside some time for Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions, please just use the Q&A function in your Zoom toolbar. Okay, so without further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce Will, who, as I said, has helped us present in the past. Will is the creative director at OXD, which is a design and technology consulting firm located here in beautiful Vancouver, BC. Will's experience and expertise is nothing if not impressive. Those who know, they know. So a quick rundown, he owned a digital agency called Mod7, which was acquired by OXD. He was a lecturer at Emily Carr University. His design experience ranges all things visual, from graphic design, motion graphics, interactive design, to architectural design. Really, there are not many areas of design where Will doesn't have some level of expertise, which is probably why he's won over 150 industry awards. And yeah, Will has been a keynote speaker at more conferences than most of us will ever even attend. So yeah, to say Will knows a thing or two about communications is something of an understatement. So yes, I'm very excited to present all of you. Will, the floor is yours.
Wow, holy moly. Thanks for that introduction, Ian. That was amazing. Can you just follow me around and announce my arrival everywhere I go? That would be great. Thanks. So as Ian said, I'm Wil Arndt. I'm the creative director of OXD. We're a human-centered design and technology consulting firm. Now, folks, you may not be used to a creative director saying this, but that's enough about me. Let's talk about you. Folks on the call today represent, I think, various disciplines and skill sets, ranging from marketing and communications to HR and IT. And the jobs you need to get done might include specific focused tasks and responsibilities, like creating print and digital communications pieces, like memos, internal news posts, that sort of thing. Writing engaging, on-brand, high-performing content. So, and your tasks might also include more strategic aspects like increasing in, corporate alignment between employees, or just getting people to embrace and use your intranet. So for some of you, internal communications is just one of the many hats you wear. And for others, it's the core of your professional life. You live, eat, and breathe it every working day. So no matter what your role, though, I bet there are some challenges that we'll all recognize. Employees who are too busy to read what you make, and I guess this is a shout out to the cat person there. I'm sure we have more than one or two, but there's going to be cats here, so strap in. Employees who are too busy to read what you make. Content creators across your organization that publish hard to read or inaccessible content. Or publishing dry or complex content without, you want to do that without having people get that glazed look in their eyes. So if any of that sounds familiar, I've got some good news for you. Good design can help. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to cover a lot of things really quickly. We're going to ask ourselves, what is good design? And as Ian mentioned in his intro many years ago, I taught design at Emily Carr University in Vancouver. Today, you're going to get in 15 minutes what my students got in a year. And we'll go straight to the core of the fundamentals of design. Then, once we lay that foundation, we'll explore how these fundamentals can come to life or how they do come to life on two intranets that are built by Thought Farmer customers. And then we'll bring it home by looking at a practical example of how to apply these concepts and principles in your pages and posts. So we'll get really practical. So just bear with me as I get through some of the foundational stuff. And then finally, we'll carve out some time at the end for Q&A. So just feel free to drop your questions into Zoom's Q&A function as we move along, and then we'll just kind of get to them at the end. So, but if anything pops in your mind, you're like, oh, I need to know the answer to this, just go ahead and put it in. I might answer it later through the course of the webinar, but that's fine. All right, so let's kick things off by asking, what is good design? So great design, it's easy to spot, right? Sometimes it's hard to explain exactly why something is great, but you can usually just tell when you're looking at the good stuff, right? Whereas bad, really, truly awful design is also easy to spot. We don't need to ask ourselves if this design is bad, or if an experience is frustrating, or if this looks like a unicorn vomited all over your screen. And of course, sometimes some design is so bad, it's actually quite great. Like this epic call to trust and credibility. I do recommend you visit the site sometime, not now. The sound is going to overwhelm our talk. But, in the comfort of your own home or office, sit back with a glass of wine and just marvel at the sheer audacity here. So what makes great design great and what makes bad design bad? So some people say that good design is subjective, like art, right? And I disagree. Great design isn't just how something looks, it's how well it works. So this is an important distinction. Something with great aesthetic qualities can still be bad design if it impedes the functional goals and the user's tasks. It might be great art, but it's not great design. Art is made generally for oneself. Design is made to help someone else and other people achieve their objectives, which means great design can't prioritize beauty over functionality. Basically, bad design gets in the way. And that's not to say that great design doesn't look good, because of course it does. Great design is classic, and form and function can really work together to create a great style. But what I'm saying is that the criteria of whether something is designed well and therefore looks good, quote unquote, it's not completely subjective, right? It's a function of clarity of intent and a mastery of a visual vocabulary. And if great design is not subjective, and there's a visual vocabulary behind it, then it can be learned. And that's why we're here, to learn a little bit about the inherent principles of design that we can use to make our content better. And as I mentioned, you're going to get some tactical, really specific, really actionable knowledge that you can use today. Now, you're not going to walk away from this webinar and become a design expert in 30 minutes. But if you can pick up at least one new principle or idea, then I believe that this can help you craft better communications, not just on your intranet, but everywhere. Here's a quick sampling of some of the things I'd cover with my first year Emily Carr students. Today, we're going to focus on a few common areas where internal communicators often stumble. Okay, you ready? All right, so let's get started. We're going to start way back at the beginning. Some of this might sound incredibly obvious to many of you, but these concepts build on each other, so just bear with me. It all begins with frames of reference. This box, this defines a frame. It delineates an area of space. This frame can be oriented horizontally or vertically, and this is what we call the ground. And a shape within the ground becomes the figure. Everything surrounding it, the figure, is referred to as negative space or white space. You'll hear the words white space a lot. Typically, the ground remains stable. It's not moving. It has a sort of it creates this stable space, while the figure appears less stable. So the smaller shape here is still the figure, regardless of the color. So it's important to mention that negative space or white space, it doesn't need to be white, right? It's just the ground around the figure. And again, this is generally stable space, although sometimes it's unstable. So this is a classic example of where the relationship is unstable. You either see a vase or you see two faces, or often it's flipping back and forth and driving you batty. So the more stable the relationship, the better we can lead our audience to focus on what we want them to see versus what they're trying to see. So this is why it's important to be able to understand this concept. And until our digital workplaces and intranets fully transition to augmented reality, the frame remains the cornerstone of design. Though, I mean, if you've seen some of the Apple Vision Pro demos, you'll notice the frame still plays a very key role. The interface, it's basically just virtual planes and screens overlaid onto the physical space. So we're really still dealing with frames here. So white space itself is a powerful design element, and we'll demonstrate that towards the end of this webinar. Space can correlate to quality because more space means there's fewer elements and there's a scarcity of elements. So compare the use of space in a high-end retail store versus a discount retail store, or even online, like on Amazon's website, right? Compare that to Tiffany's website. Here, space communicates sophistication, luxury, scarcity. More white space can significantly improve content readability and focus attention on your key messages. So use white space around text and between elements to create a clean, uncluttered layout that emphasizes your points. Now, there are different kinds of different kinds of forces at work within a composition, and we can use these to direct how the viewer interprets the figures and objects. The first screen force is the vertical force. So vertical lines suggest energy and excitement because the pull of gravity charges these vectors with extra energy. Whereas the horizontal force suggests calmness, tranquility, and rest. A level horizon projects stability, conservatism, reliability. And so here for Bank of America, strong horizontal lines in its design emphasize a dependable and traditional image. A tilted horizon, and in film, you'll sometimes hear this called the Dutch angle. It conveys a dynamic quality, right? It's full of energy and a sense of progress, sometimes unease too, depending on how it's used. So strong diagonal elements demonstrate a sense of energy and vitality here for the Emily Carr University website. But as I mentioned, context matters, right? A tilted horizon can also create feelings of stress. And in this context, the diagonal is less energetic and vibrant, and maybe more, are we going to crash? So depends on the context and your point of view. So similar to screen forces is the concept of vectors, which are just as powerful. When we understand vectors, we can start to direct the eye from one point to another point within or even outside the frame. There are three types of vectors that we usually use: graphic vectors, index vectors, and motion vectors. We don't have time to talk about motion today, and it's probably less useful for non-designers anyway. So we're just going to focus on graphic and index right now. A graphic vector guides our eyes in a certain direction, but the direction is ambiguous, and we say that the directional magnitude is low. So these crisscrossing lines or crisscrossing wires, they loosely direct the eye. They create a sense of dynamism, even if you don't exactly know where to look, or they don't exactly tell you where to look. And if you contrast that with an index vector, that's something that points unquestionably in a specific direction. Like an arrow is an index vector personified, essentially, right? Or the eyes of this adorable dog, no doubt directing your eye towards some off-screen treat. The way you use vectors can have different effects within a composition. So two or more index or motion vectors pointing in the same direction are called continuing vectors. And these vectors support each other to establish or maintain a specific single focus. And we'll see some examples of this later on in practice too. Sometimes it's useful to put content at the end of these vectors, right, to increase the hierarchical position of the content, make it more noticeable. Sometimes it can be a bit heavy-handed, so it has to be done carefully, but this is a good way to do that. And we can use converging vectors to increase the aesthetic energy of an event, right? So in this example, the two people looking towards each other keep the energy within the frame. But diverging vectors can expand the space outside a composition, and they can make the viewer aware of, something beyond the frame. So let's quickly jump over to color. We could spend an entire session on color alone. We won't. We'll just say a few notes about it. I mean, color can convey very important information, and it's really emerged as like this evolutionary advantage for humans. If it took you longer than a second to spot the predator, you're dead, right? So very, very important. But used well, color can add another critical dimension to your designs. So let's look at an example here. Use color to create additional focal points and visual hierarchy. Moderate use of color can deliver strong cues about what's important in a design. It creates structure within text and across elements, and it makes it easier for the viewer to remember key points. So if a little bit of color is good for creating hierarchy and articulating emphasis, then a lot of color must be really, really great, right? Well, no. If everything is highlighted, then nothing is emphasized, and all we get is that same old unicorn vomiting all over your screen, which is fine if that's what you're going for. So let's take a quick pause here, just to check in to see how you're doing. Let us know if you're having any technical issues. Use the chat to let us know. Now that the chat's up and running, looks like we're rolling now, so that's great. Yeah, and then keep those questions coming. Yeah, there's a few questions already in the Q&A, so keep them coming in the Q&A function on Zoom. We've got a few more concepts to go through, and then we're going to tie this all together with some real-world applications. All right.
Yeah, just a quick one there, Will.
Yeah.
Sorry, the chat was disabled. My bad. Hands up at the beginning. It was restricted at the beginning, but chat is now open to everybody if you want to use chat or Q&A, either one.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. This is why we have Ian. It makes everything run that much better. All right. So once we understand how objects operate inside the frame, we can learn how to direct the eye to elements of most importance, right? And we do this through the concept of hierarchy, which I mentioned before when we were talking about color. So something critical to understand here, as you've seen with the color example, is that you can't emphasize everything, right? When you try that, all the elements compete for attention and nothing stands out. Everything's just yelling at the same time. Everything is louder, but nothing is heard. So we establish hierarchy by manipulating objects to set different visual weights between these objects. So, these are some of the ways we do that. We use size, shape, color, depth, texture, right? All these elements allow us to, emphasize certain weights. So for instance, if we look at size and placement, an element will appear more hierarchical if it is larger than the other elements in the frame. We're going to naturally look at the largest element in a design, and we're going to naturally look at the first element in a design. So this blue box here has really the largest level of hierarchy on this layout. In this version, we maintain the size, but we adjust the placement. And it starts to become a little less clear what the most important element on the page is. The blue block, it still has the most visual gravity, but it starts to work against our natural tendencies of identifying the first element in a composition as the most dominant. And sometimes designers use this to add a nice tension to a layout. Rhythm and patterns are another way to create hierarchy. Just like songs have a rhythm, right? When we're listening to a song with a clear rhythm, we recognize the pattern and begin to expect the beats. And that same idea is at work here in the Hotel Tonight app. Each listing is displayed with a picture, location, and a price, and we know exactly where to look for elements in the pattern, like the price. So we can keep scrolling, and our eye will generally stay in the same direction. We expect to see the price show up in that spot all the time, right? But a break in this rhythm will appear more hierarchical. So here on the Airbnb website, the browse feed has a rhythm that's intentionally disrupted by the guest favorite labels on photos. And this strategic break makes those listings stand out, grabbing the viewer's attention. But you've got to be careful with this, because if you use it too much and there's too many breaks, then the pattern vanishes and it's not useless anymore. So when we talk about hierarchy, there's 3 essential levels of dominance within a composition. And this is an important note too that we'll get back to for sure when we do the examples. There's the dominant level and the subdominant level and the subordinate level. So let's look at an example of these in action. Here's a simple layout, right? And when we talk about the dominant level, what we mean is this. It's the element with the most visual weight and the one that gets the most emphasis. And here, the large title is made dominant through bold type, its placement at the top, and its larger scale. It's just bigger. The second level of dominance is the subdominant, and that's here. And these are the items that get a secondary emphasis. And this is a good level to use when we want to highlight focal points that can help the viewer quickly scan a composition. This is really good for scannability, and we'll, again, see examples of that. And then the third level of dominance in a hierarchy is the subordinate. And this is the level with the least visual weight. And it's going to recede into the background to some degree. And this usually contains your body text and things like that. So using hierarchy, we can make sure the viewer is focused on the right things, and we can help them understand what they're looking at in the most efficient way possible. Finally, we have a couple of very important terms related to type and layout. Legibility versus readability. What's the difference, right? They sound similar, but they're not the same. Legibility is, can you read it? It's about the size and contrast, the appearance of the shapes, and being able to distinguish individual letters. This is, obviously an important user interface consideration, especially when creating accessible designs. Low contrast can make text hard to read, especially for those people, with vision challenges. So that's very important that your text is legible. And we compare legibility with readability. And that's, do you want to read it, right? This depends now, this is almost getting more into communications. It depends on the user, depends on the context. This example here is legible, but would you want to read detailed specifications on bulk mailing? Maybe, depends on who you are. Often it's an editorial or content choice, and it's not about the user interface, but they're connected, right? And if you want something to be read, it has to appeal to readability, and it has to be legible, easy and comfortable to read without eye strain or distraction. All right, so let's take a look at some of these principles in action on 2 intranets created by Thought Farmer customers. The first example that we're going to look at is from Rick Engineering. They're an engineering firm, surprise, planning and design, and they serve the Western United States. Their intranet reflects their public-facing brand, which is stable, innovative, and people-oriented. And you can see already the stability is coming through here in the use of the horizontals in both uh, the design elements of the navigation, the news carousel grid, and the photo choices of the news thumbnails, right? Many have stable horizons in them. They demonstrate that people-oriented value by using photos and teams of people, and the choice of photos uses converging vectors to direct the eye towards the post title. They're also using the principles of rhythm and rhythm and pattern breaks in their quick links card. So notice here how the color is used to set up a rhythm of orange icons. But a break in that color rhythm using blue instead of orange draws attention to the reward section and the strategic plan quick links. Next, let's take a quick look at the New York State Department of Labor's intranet called Dolly. Very cute. Here you can see strong horizontals at play in the navigation and news card, mixed with a background full of dynamic vectors. It's also a great example of effective color use. So here they're using color to create contrast between the background and foreground cards. And they're also creating design unity and consistency through the color palette. Design unity means all parts of a design fit together well. Everything should look like it belongs together. And that happens when all the design elements are consistent. When designs have good unity and are consistent, they just look more organized, high quality, and trustworthy. So overall, I think, the Dolly example here conveys a message of stability blended with a sense of progress and forward thinking. So let's wrap up with some practical tips now for non-designers. We're going to apply some simple concepts we're going to have a text-heavy content example of something that might appear on your intranet. Here we've got a sample news post from a fictitious company creatively called Acme Corp. The post informs employees about a new 5-year strategic vision. There's not a lot of formatting used, which can make it difficult to scan. Zooming in, we see a welcome message. There's a recap of the company's strategic pillars. And further down, you can see here a table that outlines the organization's 5-year strategic plan. So as it is, it's not bad, but it's not easy to digest or grasp the main points or understand the overall structure of information. Other than using like a numbered list and the basic grid of the table, there's not a lot of structure happening here. And sometimes we may be tempted to add too much formatting in an effort to help the reader understand what's important. But it's that same case of everyone yelling at the same time. Everything is louder, but nothing is heard. We want to strive for purposeful design. Every design choice, from spacing to imagery, should have a clear purpose that's related to your message. So we want to aim for design choices that enhance the viewer's understanding and engagement. And we don't want to just, fill space or add decoration. So before we format this post together, let's take a quick look at one of the most common tools available to us, non-designers. One you'll find in most intranet content management systems and all text editors on the planet, the editor toolbar. This is the editor toolbar in ThoughtFarmer. It's got all the typical formatting and styling features you'd expect. Predefined styles that you can use to just, pick a style for your font, for your content. Font families, right? Change the font family. You can change the font size, font color, background color, right? That highlighting effect. Add links. You can insert media, right? Graphics, emojis, images, code. Content structuring tools like tables, bulleted lists, indenting checklists. And all your typical text emphasis tools like bold, italics, underline, strike through. You can remove formatting too, which is handy. Now, when it comes to formatting legibly and styling with an aim for scannability and comprehension, I say just ignore all these buttons. Just don't even. The most effective and impactful formatting and styling can be done with minimal tools. So definitely use predefined styles for your text, assuming particularly if your intranet manager has set them up using your organization's brand guidelines. Because if you do this, you'll rarely ever need to use the font family and the font size selectors. You won't have to change the font. You won't have to change the size of the text because that'll be all ready to go for you. Bold text should only be used to highlight key points or critical information, so, and just very sparingly, right? Italics should only be used for emphasis, and even then, don't use them too often. And avoid underlining text, because nowadays underlined text usually means hyperlinks, right? And so that can be really confusing for people. So you can show emphasis using italics instead. And then when it comes to colors, choose one, maybe two for your entire document. And that includes your charts and graphs. If you have to, use shades of your chosen color for differentiation, but just, strive for simplicity. Again, color is also, usually dictated by your brand guidelines. So hopefully those will give you a key um, uh, direction on how to use color. And also, you don't need to be heavy-handed when it comes to how you organize and separate content. You can use white space way more than you realize, right? We're going to see that in action in just a second. I'd also avoid overusing bullet points when line breaks can work. I've seen, bullets, nested bullets on presentations, and it's like these sharp little needles everywhere. And often line breaks work just as effectively. And then you want to eliminate or minimize the default borders around text boxes, tables, and other elements in your tools. Also, avoid combining multiple formatting styles on the same text element, right? Bold, italicize, and color something, right? Like that's just going to add some visual confusion and fight against readability. Okay. Remember, the primary goal of your document is to communicate effectively, not showcase all the cool formatting options that you have. Focus on substance over style. So make intentional design choices that support and enhance the understanding of your content rather than detract from it or compete with it. Let's go back and see how we can apply this to our sample here. First of all, we can use the predefined text styles to add structure to the document. So already this creates some clear headings, consistently typeset. You don't have to worry about the size or if this needs to be bold or not. You'll also notice that we pulled out the first line of that intro paragraph and set that as the section title to draw the reader in and improve scannability. Next, we can use some strategic bolding to just further improve scannability of this content. Here, we're using bold really sparingly and only on the strategic pillar titles. And remember the hierarchy principle, right? Where we can help the viewer focus on the right things. That's what we're doing here. So next, let's tackle that table that's on this page. We all know working with tables is a struggle. Even for designers, tables are hard. And almost all of the preset tables that you find in Word or Google Docs, they come with lines and shading baked in, which makes it even harder to work with sometimes, right? Even the default Thought Farmer table here has a big box around the table, some shading for the top row, lines between the cells. Edward Tufte, he's a renowned expert in data visualization and information design. He calls this data imprisonment and chart junk. Here's a quote from him. Chart junk is basically useless or optically active grids, boxes, and frames around graphs, vast empty framing areas, and grid prisons that surround unexplained and unreadable numbers. Very little chart junk appears in newspapers or in major scientific journals, since the content is too important and too complex for fooling around with chart junk. So while Tufte is critical, Jan Tischold is a bit more constructive. And Tischold was a typographer and a graphic designer, had a huge influence on typography and book design in the 20th century. And way back in 1967, Jan wrote, "The setting of tables, often approached with gloom, may with careful thought be turned into a work of great pleasure." Like, wow, I love to have great pleasure at working with tables. First, try to do without rules altogether. And by rules here, he means lines. They should be used only when they are absolutely necessary. Vertical rules are needed only when the space between columns is so narrow that mistakes will occur in the reading without rules. Tables without vertical rules look better. Thin rules are better than thick ones. So let's put some of that's theory, right? Let's put it into action. So step one on our table here, we're going to nuke all the formatting. Just remove the cell colors, remove all the grid lines, the fills, the borders, just get rid of it all. You'll even notice that we're even removing the bolding from the text labels in the header row. Some of you may be feeling a little nervous about this, but don't worry, we'll get there. Make sure the text is left aligned, numbers are right aligned, right? Keep that consistent. This includes the column titles. And just, don't paste whatever your spreadsheet or accounting software gives you when it comes to the numbers. You can round numbers, you can remove decimals, unless that level of accuracy is, really important and it really matters, but usually it doesn't. Next, we want to resize the columns to suit the length of the data. And if you do have rows that go to 2 lines like we do here, please just make sure to align all your rows to the top, not the bottom. The exception here is the top header row. Keep the top header row bottom aligned. One thing I want to pause for a second is just, I want to emphasize a really important distinction here. Tables are not the same as spreadsheets, right? They might look the same, but the purpose of a spreadsheet is record keeping and data analysis. And that means in a spreadsheet, data consistency is really, really important. And you need to be consistent when dealing with units of information. But a table is not a spreadsheet. It's a layout tool, and it's meant to be read, and it should be used to help people better understand the data that's in there. And so that means now we can start to use white space to create structure and groupings within our content and to emphasize some of those commonalities. So here we're using space to sort of group years together, right? So it's easier to understand how the content is interrelated, which rows are related to each other. Remember the principle of rhythm, how Airbnb would break that rhythm to lead the eye? That's kind of what we're doing here. We're interrupting the rhythm established by the rows to create structure. We're also using white space as a structural element. So I'm in a generous mood today. It's a bit cloudy out, but that's okay. I'm still feeling very, very generous. And I think we're going to allow ourselves the use of one single line. And that's going to be as a separator for the column headings at the top, like that. So now, since this is a table and not a spreadsheet, we could remove some repetitive elements to clean it up even more. So in this case, the years, they don't need to be repeated on every line. And since this is a table, we're going to break my don't change the type size rule and adjust the type size just a little, and it will read better when seen in context with the page body copy above. And then finally, I think it's worth addressing the actual content so that we can streamline and tighten this further. So for example, we can strip out a lot of the fluffy words and rephrase a lot of the lines to make them tighter. And then with, doing that, we're going to get a lot of extra space. And so we can make almost all of these rows a single line like that. So believe it or not, that's it. You might think, Will, that's too plain. But no, it's clean, it's readable, it's understandable at a glance, right? You can read this. It's not about the table, it's about the content in the table. You can see the groupings of year, objectives, initiatives, metrics, departments, budgets, all just by scanning across the row. There's no borders needed. And we only used one rule or line for the whole thing. And so that's the power of design principles. So if we look at the top of this page again, it's got good hierarchy. It's scannable at a glance, right? It's a little better than what we started with. And it's much better than this. And there might be a logical rationale behind the color and styling choices here, but it just ends up shouting at the reader. And it's just hard to figure out what's going on and what's important. And then looking at our before and after shots, let me ask you, which one would you rather read? And which one looks easier to understand? We're not going to win any design awards for this, but that's not the goal. Remember, bad design gets in the way, and good design uses text styling as minimal and an unobtrusive way as possible, so that your content shines through. But will you say, what if my content isn't good? So that's a communication issue. That's a bit beyond the scope of this webinar. As a designer, I can only help you style and present your content. Creating great content is still up to you communicators. But that said, I'm going to share a little pro tip with you, something that is guaranteed to improve even the driest, most poorly conceived content. Do we have a few seconds, Ian, to go into that, or should we just get to questions?
No, we definitely have a little bit of time to lean into this.
Okay. So really quick, based on my 30 years of design experience, I find that a well-designed kitten can be effectively deployed to add interest to a page. So let's examine how this kitten enhances the reader's experience of the content. We use the principle of scale to give the kitten the highest level of hierarchy on the page. Note how these index vectors, like laser eyes, unquestionably point up towards the introductory text, directing the reader's attention up towards the president's message. The tilted horizontal of the kitten's body acts as a sense, or it adds a sense of playful, like a dynamic playfulness to the composition, while the graphic vectors implied by the splayed legs and cute ears draw the reader's attention down towards the main body copy below. Next, let's observe how the principles of rhythm and pattern break are being used here, because we have line of text, line of text, line of text, kitten, line of text. And the kitten break in the established rhythm helps further arrest the reader's attention. So, and all this really just leads me to the final, most fundamental principle of design. Obviously, it's kittens. So if you remember nothing else from this talk, I guess you could just put kittens everywhere and you should be okay. All right, really quick recap of the concepts we covered today. We covered frames of reference, scale, color, vectors and vector directions, stream forces, hierarchy, rhythm, patterns, legibility and readability, or legibility versus readability, and of course, don't forget the kittens. And really quick, we have some design resources that Thought Farmer's brilliant designer Josh put together for you. You can use this for content and inspiration. We'll send this your way after the webinar. Tools.design is a resource of resources, so it's full of illustration and icon packs that are big time savers. There's a couple of free stock photo sites here that will help you find imagery that you can download to go along with your posts. I do think it's really cool that Thought Farmer already has an Unsplash integration right out of the box. So that means you could just find and add like really great quality photos on your intranet without having to download anything or leave the editor experience. And then Dribbble here is a designer community, also great for non-designers looking for inspiration. And also you can check out our 10 award-winning intranet's white paper too. The only thing I ask is that you just try to steer clear of the cliched business stock images. So let's try to do better than this. But I mean, you could even rescue this with a kitten, so you're good to go. All right, cool. So if you enjoyed the webinar, share your thoughts in the chat. But most importantly, let the Thought Farmer folks know what other topics you'd like them to cover next. And then let's move on to our Q&A portion.
Thank you, Will. That was a stellar presentation, as is to be expected from you. Okay, by far and away the most common item in the chat is, will this recording and deck be available after the fact? Yes, there is a lot in there in the presentation, so we will be sending a recording of the presentation, the deck, and a few additional resources. You can expect to have an email plus a landing page in your inbox within kind of the next day or so. Okay, so to a few questions. First question, Will, isn't actually a question. It was more a comment in the chat, but it definitely leads into a question. So when you were talking about predefined styles, Sarah had mentioned that using predefined styles will, quote unquote, the brand police won't be after you. Totally fair and valid. But what we occasionally have the odd client who comes in without a kind of defined set of brand standards or style guides, that kind of thing. So what can you do if you don't have a very kind of rigorous set of style guides?
So yeah, so basically, if you're an organization and say you're rolling out an intranet and there's no brand style or style guide to draw from, I think, well, first, the ideal scenario, hire a designer to develop brand guidelines for you. That would be the #1 recommendation. I mean, even if it's a very small scale, it's going to help you a lot. But I recognize that might not always be a practical option. I would, if you have a public-facing website, I would begin there to maintain a unified look. Sometimes it's appropriate to make sure that the website and the intranet are unified. Sometimes it's not. There's actually times where you may not do this, and actually have a little worksheet that can help you figure that out. So start there, but I would define your core elements. So those are going to be your color palette, 1 or 2 colors, 1 or 2 fonts, and just a consistent imagery approach for your photographs, icons, illustrations. And then just be consistent. Make sure your chosen fonts, your colors, imagery, that they're consistent all across your communications. And then iterate and evolve, right? Your initial guidelines, they don't have to be perfect. And just start with the basics and then refine them as you apply them and see more use cases for things that they don't address. Also, make sure that you document and share them with everyone in your
Mm.
company, right? So they can actually access them and use them. So yeah, I'd start there if you can't really go for a designer right away, but definitely, I would work with a designer if you can.
Okay, cool. An anonymous question here. That kind of segues on from that. Well, ideally, you can have a designer, yes, but if you don't have a designer, one needs to use stock software sites, design sites, that kind of thing. Someone has asked, what do you think about Canva?
Uh, Canva, good question. Design schools hate it. That said, it is important and it is useful. And I think part of the issue when you're trying to roll out um, brand consistent communications across your company is that the ability to do that is often locked away in software that's inaccessible to non-designers, right? So, designers are using like InDesign and Illustrator and Photoshop that everyone else can't use, or they don't have a license for it or whatever. And so now this designer becomes the bottleneck for any kind of design thing. So I feel like, if you have a well-established design system, Canva is a great way to get non-designers the tools they need to execute on certain design things, right? And I would definitely use, templates that a designer has designed to keep maintaining consistency. And then really for designers, this frees up your time, right? If you're a designer and people all over your organization are doing some of the more, mundane kind of like day-to-day stuff, you're able to really focus on the like really gnarly, fun design challenges that others can't solve, and it gives you more time for that. So I'm a big proponent actually of Canva, not necessarily Canva per se. I think you can use like Google Slides as like a layout tool. Like I've seen that used. HubSpot has a really great Google Slide template for social media that you can adapt, and then you can just export PNGs and JPEGs. Whatever tool, as long as it's accessible, I think it's a great option to offload some of the designer load and also release some of the bottlenecking there.
Yeah, I think Nikki summed it up well there. Canva, a blessing and a curse. Great idea from Nikki, actually, something she said she'd love to see in the future. Or he, sorry, I'm making assumptions there. Tips for writing an intranet style guide that the average content author can use and apply. So idea for the next webinar. Well,
Yeah, that is an entire webinar topic there for sure. Yeah.
okay, and just I have a question. Well, that relates to kittens. So I know you're kind of the use of kittens was a little bit tongue in cheek, and it's bringing kind of humor into your content, but humor is a very subjective thing. Now, our internet has lots of cute kittens and cute puppies, and we have entire photo galleries dedicated to pets. But how can you make sure that everybody gets a kick out of the humor that you're trying to instill, or that more so that nobody kind of gets offended?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously kittens, that example was just a fun way to end the webinar. The kittens are cute. They're also incredibly distracting, so I don't recommend deploying them unless for specific effect. But yeah, I mean, as with anything communications related, you've got to know your audience and your context, right? Know your audience. And that is something that is where the communication professional aspect comes in, right? To format it, right, stick with simple design principles for maximum impact and the clarity of your content. You want to just keep that simple so that your message comes through. And if the message is kittens, that's great. But again, know your audience, understand your corporate culture when you're working with that.
Cool. We're kind of getting close in time. So we have more questions. If we don't get to your questions, we will follow up personally with you. So this one seems relevant. One of the challenges we have is just the amount of information that we consider quote unquote important. Is there a way to make sure certain pieces of content don't get lost in the noise?
Hmm. Yeah, this is definitely a problem across organizations. You've got multiple departments. Each department is their stuff is important, and they want to make sure that it's featured on internet homepages, or there's always like this competition for space, right? On the homepage in particular. I think first, it's important. like to define an understanding and set some clear criteria. What does important mean for your organization, right? I would prioritize content based on timely, like urgency, right? How relevant it is, and the audience need, right? So once you define that's a key strategic question. Once you define it, I mean, actually, highlighting important, not important stuff, right? You can use like banners, highlighted sections, icons that draw your attention to important content. Um, and it also makes it really important to avoid excessive decoration or formatting on other content so that this stuff can actually stand out, right? Otherwise, it becomes this escalating arms race for attention. I also think, particularly for intranets, personalization is a great tool, right? Filters or different views based on user type or whatever group they're a part of, they can help make sure that content is relevant. It'll lessen the noise of content that's not relevant, and it just makes sure that it matches audience need. And I think feedback is important too, right? So you need to define what that means, but also let employees rate or comment on how useful content is. And that can start to help you identify what's important to your audience. But again, I would always start by looking at the kinds of content that you have and come up with an agreed upon criteria for defining what important really means.
Yeah, great little insight from Nikki again. Thank you, Nikki. When there's so much content that it becomes white noise, I try to make it clear that the internet is just a tool, not the end all be all of a colleague's campaign, which is
Yeah,
some sage advice.
yeah.
Okay, one more quick question, and this is a question I know that's might ruffle a few feathers. How much should I expect to pay for a seasoned designer like you to do my company's brand guidelines? Or should I hire a designer to do all the brand work first?
Hired a seasoned designer like me, just a bottle of whiskey and a cigar. You know how we creative directors roll. Um, yeah, I mean, this is really going to depend. Like the question is like, how much is a car, right? A car could be cheap. A car could be very expensive. It depends on what you need to get out of it, and also the amount of, in this case, the amount of time that needs to be put into it. The question around doing the brand work, yes, if you don't have a brand, if you can get that brand strategy and implementation done, that's going to just have a ripple effect across your organization, and it's going to make all kinds of things easier, including your intranet, right? So if you don't have that and you have the option to do it, do that first. Often, at OXD, we'll have clients come to us asking for a website, and they think that as part of the website, they get a new brand as well, and that's not how it works, right? Like the website is a tool, and the brand is more than that. It's the who you are as an organization, and the when we talk about things like fonts, color, we're actually talking about brand identity, right? And so that's an extension of your brand. So definitely, like there's some brand strategic work that needs to be done. That could actually be some of that could already be done, and you don't even know it, right? It's part of your vision. It's part of your values, your corporate values. That all plays into your kind of brand persona. And then a designer would create a brand identity that goes along with that. And your brand identity can change every 3 to 5 years. Or like TELUS hasn't changed their brand identity in like 20 years, and it's been very successful for them. But your brand won't change, right? Because that's going to be related to your values and your core. But yeah, definitely I would start with your brand.
Cool. Okay. Just one last question. Sorry, and I know there's a few that I won't get to, but we will follow up with you. Hilda asked, will Thought Farmer have a preview mobile feature? I think what you're referring to there, Hilda, is it kind of like a litmus, but for your internet where you can preview your content across different devices and screens. There is such a feature on our roadmap. I'll have someone from our product team reach out to you in relation to what that is and when it will be released. But yeah, overall, thank you, Will. That was an amazing, insightful webinar, as they tend to be. Again, there was a kind of a first part to this, which was Extreme Makeover Internet Edition. We'll include that in the follow-up email, and again, you can expect that email to be in your inboxes within the next 24 hours, and it will link to a landing page with all sorts of useful, helpful resources.
Awesome. Thank you, Ian. This has been really great. Lots of great questions. I only wish we could have gotten to them all, but yeah, maybe we can loop back on some of those questions in the response email. But yeah, this was great. Thanks everyone for sticking around. I know we went over, but hopefully you found this useful.
Cool. Thanks, Will. Thanks, everybody. And yeah, we'll follow up ASAP.
Bye.